Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, with more primary elections taking place and more far-left radical DSA socialist candidates winning, what does this mean going forward? We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Wednesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand. It's real easy and completely free to do so. Just head on over to your favorite podcast app, search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. We had more primary elections take place across the United States, as we are now just 76 days away from Election Day. And even though our primaries here in North Carolina were months ago, I mean, you give, of course, the early March primary, like many states have, as we have watched since March, a variety of different states, and it's all, again, dependent on the state and the legislature and how their process is set up. States now continuing the process of wrapping up their primary elections, getting everything squared away and ready to go for the November election. We have seen and have talked about in great detail here on this show the rise of these far-left DSA, socialist, very progressive candidates that, to their credit, have been very successful in many of these Democrat primaries that have taken place across the nation. We saw another example of this last night in Florida. Now, important to note, Florida is a very red state, and so the Democrat who won in Florida last night, who is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, has absolutely no shot in winning a race in the state, but it is interesting that things played out the way that they did. So current Democratic State Representative Angie Nixon, who is a proud member of the DSA, upset in the Democrat primary for U.S. Senate in Florida last night as Nixon ran against an individual by the name of Alexander Vindman, who was a prominent critic of Donald Trump, who also, by the way, played a very central role in the left's attempt to impeach President Donald Trump in 2019, who polling showed should have won. And by the way, outspent, in this case, I'm talking about Vindman, outspent his DSA opponent in Angie Nixon by a margin of 13-1. This was a massive amount of spending in a race, a lot of money being flowed in for mailers and television ads and social media and all of the things that take place during an election to get you and your candidate across the finish line. It's pretty remarkable because she ended up defeating Vindman by almost 12 percentage points, despite a more than $16.3 million war chest that he had, compared to just $1 million by Representative Angie Nixon. That is remarkable. By July, when the last time that reports were filed, Vindman had spent about $9 million on the race, while Nixon had only spent $700,000. Now, again, this isn't going to matter because the end result of this will be Angie Nixon facing off against a Senator Ashley Moody from Florida. So it really isn't going to matter there. It's not going to be a problem. Florida is a state that just 25 years ago was seen as very purple, very much a toss-up, I think in large part due to the great success in recent years that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has had, and a lot of individuals evacuating states like New York and other states in the Northeast to get out of the hellholes that these Democrat politicians have created. Florida has become a solid red state. Byron Donalds is going to be their next governor when this is all said and done. it's not a problem. It's not really an issue, but it is another interesting step forward. And so that brings me to this article I caught this week over at a publication called the Washington Monthly that has this conversation. And this is, by the way, the Washington Monthly is an independent news outlet in Washington, D.C. And here's their headline. Americans like moderate politicians and progressive policies, but not socialism. Now, I don't fully agree with that headline. I don't fully agree with that title, but it does a pretty good job of summarizing this piece, and it is laying out something that we've talked about in great detail here on this program. And it is important to note for those that are not super involved in the political process. We talked about this on yesterday's show, which, by the way, if you missed that, encourage you to head on over to your favorite podcast app or YouTube and check out yesterday's program. We talked about a veto by Governor Josh Stein and a press conference held by him and Democrats here in North Carolina, where they were talking about how Republicans are attempting to strip voting rights away during the primary election. One of the key points that I made during yesterday's show was that people don't vote in primaries. And if you need any evidence to back that up, well, we can look at the March primary that happened here in North Carolina, where less than 20% of the more than 7.6 million registered voters across the state of North Carolina actually showed up during a 17-day early voting period, absentee by mail, and election day, and decided to actually cast ballots in that contest. This is not a new thing. This has been consistent, and it's not just a North Carolina thing either. This becomes a pretty prominent issue across the United States. People do not vote in primaries. The vast majority of the American population, which I will contend is a major problem, do not stay that politically involved, do not stay that politically in tune. And so it's important to measure and understand that when these discussions are taking place about the DSA, these very far left progressive, these very far left socialist Marxist candidates are winning in primaries. It's not like 70% of the population showed up in Florida last night and voted for a DSA candidate. It's not like 70% of the population showed up in Michigan. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago when we talked about that, to vote for a DSA candidate? We're talking about 15, 20, 25, maybe 30% of the eligible electorate actually showing up. And it is no surprise that the far left progressive wing, who to their credit is very mobilized, they are the individuals that have been standing on street corners since early last year, protesting Donald Trump, calling for his impeachment, calling for him to be thrown out of office, thrown in jail. You still see these people. This is the group that spends their weekends protesting the president of the United States. They're doing their No Kings protests across the nation. These are the active, engaged voters. These are the people that, again, would spend a beautiful weekend when most folks are spending time with their friends and their family and enjoying the summer months before kids go back to school and life gets back to some level of normalcy. You're spending it enjoying your time. They're spending it protesting the president of the United States, who won an election all the way back in November of 2024. And so those are the people that are showing up in a primary. Those are the individuals right now that are really energized, really engaged, and really involved in politics. And of course, no surprise, they skew very heavily to the political left. And so the million-dollar question that everybody has, myself included, and we haven't really seen it play out yet, is do these DSA victories, do these very far left progressive candidates winning their primaries with a much smaller electorate, do these victories and can these victories translate to a general election? Can these victories, can these policies, can these ideas translate when you'll have voter turnout in the high 60s and into the 70%, which is pretty typical during a midterm election? It's not until a presidential election that you see the high 70s and low to mid 80s in terms of voter percentage and voter turnout. And even then, it doesn't get that high in some places. And that is the question that is being asked. And this interesting article over at Washington Monthly dives into some of these details and lays out what exactly is going on right now with these policies and these candidates. We have continually seen over the last couple of months some pretty secure victories from those that are on the far left side of the political aisle, the DSA, the self-described socialists, the very far left of progressives that hate the United States of America, hate our systems as they exist right now, and in large part want to see them disappear. And that brought me to this article over at Washington Monthly with the headline, "Americans Like Moderate Politicians," which I tend to agree with for the most part, "and progressive policies." Don't fully agree with that. But then that other part of the headline, "but not socialism." So I wanted to read through a little of this. I've got another article from the Washington Examiner with this headline, "In Common Sense versus Crazy, Democrats Lose Every Time," and some interesting data from a recent Carolina Journal poll here in North Carolina that asked voters about Democratic socialists. So we'll walk through all of those in the remainder of the program. Let's dive into this article. It reads, "The Democrat Party's big tent has widened this summer as 5 U.S. House candidates backed by Democratic Socialists of America won primaries in safely Democratic districts, which is very important, and almost surely will join DSA-endorsed incumbents Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib. Predictably, this development has raised questions regarding how welcoming the Democrat Party establishment should be of the DSA, how reflective the DSA is of the Democratic base, and whether an increasing association with socialism would help or hurt the party in the general election. I have described now for years what I believe to be this major civil war that is ongoing within the Democrat Party. Because as the headline of this article notes over at Washington Monthly, and as I think most common sense individuals can wrap their head around, these far left socialist policies are not palatable by the vast majority of people. And the Democrats raise the risk in a midterm election year, which undoubtedly they will see some level of success in. Republicans in the Oval Office, Donald Trump, Republicans controlling Congress, the United States House, the United States Senate. This is a year where Democrats should do well. And not that I'm putting the cart too far ahead of the horse on this, but a lot of the things going on right now will pave the path and have some level of influence. The percentage of that influence, how much of that influence is unknown, but will play a part in what goes on in 2028. I know that sounds crazy to say. We're here in August of 2026. We have not even hit the midterm elections yet, and there's already some discussion about 2028. But these things take a long time to play out. These things take a long time to really get moving. And so the question that myself and many other political observers have been asking in recent months is, what does this look like? What does this power struggle within the Democrat Party look like, not only as we approach the midterms, but we see what will be an open presidential contest in 2028. Donald Trump has already served. This will be his second term that he's serving right now. So he is not an incumbent, will not have the ability to run for re-election. That is an open seat. And obviously you are going to see an insane, if you thought 2016, 2020, and 2024 were nuts, get ready to start popping your popcorn. 2028 is going to be absolute insanity. And the question is, can the more moderate Democrat Party, I'm not saying these people are moderate, but more moderate in comparison to the DSA and these very far left-wing ideas, can the more moderate branch of the Democrat Party hold the dam back from exploding with these DSA candidates that will undoubtedly bring the Democrat Party to its knees in 2028. I can say with almost complete certainty that if you had an AOC, for example, running for president in 2028, there is a very small percentage chance that she could be successful. Why? Because the ideas and the things that she supports are not palatable to the vast majority of the American people. They might work in New York City. They might work in San Francisco. They might work in places like Charlotte here in North Carolina. But as you zoom out and have to win votes, tens of millions of votes from all across the United States of America, those ideas fall flat on their face every single time. Back to the article, it reads, a new poll from CBS News and YouGov sheds some light on these issues as it relates to the DSA and related matters. On many bread and butter issues, we see a lot of common ground between Democrats, independents, liberals, and moderates in support of progressive goals. But when it comes to broader concepts of socialism and capitalism, Democrats and liberals sharply diverge from the rest of the electorate, including the crucial middle. In turn, there's little reason for the Democratic Party to embrace the socialist label as they pursue progressive policies. For example, according to the CBS News YouGov poll, 67% of respondents said, quote, wealthy people in the United States pay less than their fair share, with big majorities in agreement on the left and center. Only among Republicans and conservatives is support for that belief below 50%. However, at the same time, majorities say that they are willing to raise their own taxes when the extra money goes to various progressive priorities. For healthcare, it's 65%. For education, 62%. Food assistance, 60%. Housing, 51%. In all these areas, Democrats, independents, liberals, and moderates make up the majority, while Republicans and conservatives fall short of 50% support. The numbers reserve what respondents were asking if they are willing to raise their taxes to fund police and law enforcement, broader border and immigration enforcement, and military and defense. Republicans and conservatives say yes on all of these issues, and 51% of moderates agree on police. But because Democrats and independents oppose them, that's not enough to achieve majority support across the electorate. The Washington Monthly article goes on to say, but the left-center coalition breaks down when asked about socialism and ideological branding. And so this and some of these numbers from this CBS News YouGov poll are starting to make what for a long time, from my vantage point, has been a relatively blurry picture as to how some of this stuff is going to play out and where people really fall. This is one poll, as I've noted plenty of times, and you'll hear me say this ad nauseum as we get towards November. Polls are a single snapshot at a single period of time with a single group of people. Right? They are flawed. There is a margin of error. We have seen bad polls that have taken place in the years that have passed. This stuff is not gospel. What you look for in polling is trends. What you look for is how are things moving. And so this is one example of a poll that I believe is starting to make this picture a lot more clear as to what is going to be going on within the Democrat Party as they internally fight to determine what is the direction of their party moving forward, and what do they want to proclaim to the American people? It's a fascinating discussion. We'll get into more of this article and some others coming up as the Nick Craig Show continues. But before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, Melissa Gott and her experienced group of attorneys have consistently provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. As we chatted with Melissa on the show last week, there's a lot of use of artificial intelligence and chatbots as it relates to legal challenges, and while that could be helpful for some individuals, we heard the horror stories last week of individuals that got too far down the process using AI in a very important legal matter. And unfortunately, by the time they reached out to Melissa and her team over at the law group, it was already too late. And frankly, there was just nothing that can be done. That's why it's important to make sure you put your trust in the dedicated team over at the law group, who will ensure that your questions and problems will be dealt with and resolved as quickly as possible. They're located in downtown Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. Quick break. You're listening to the Nick Craig Show streaming live, or watching the Nick Craig Show streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and as always, available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. All right, good Wednesday to you, and welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget, if you want to get access to our daily show notes and more, those are available over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. I'll put all the links, all the articles, to everything that we talked about. Plus, you'll get access to our monthly Patreon hangout. We jump on a Zoom call for a couple of hours each and every month, talk about all the news, issues, and topics of the day. That'll be coming up next week. You can get access to that for just $5 a month, patreon.com/Nick Craig. All right, we're talking about an interesting poll out from CBS News and YouGov. They did the poll in combination. CBS pays for it, YouGov pays for it and sponsors it, and they pay a firm to go out and actually conduct the poll. And it's laying out this picture as we see the rise of these very far left DSA, socialist, Marxist, even communist style candidates that are rising to some level of prominence within the Democrat Party. We've seen that in a variety of different primary elections that have taken place over the last couple of months. And it's leaving everybody, myself included, with an unanswered question. What does this mean for the direction of the Democrat Party moving forward? As these candidates rise to some level of prominence, many of them that won primaries are in very safe Democratic districts in the United States House and will, unless something crazy happens, will likely have a successful election victory in November. They will be thrust onto the national stage. They will be members of the U.S. House, which the Democrats have a very high likelihood of flipping and gaining control of after the midterm election and as we head into next year. And so not only are these individuals going to be winning their elections, but they can be and I would suspect will be a real pain in the side for somebody like a Hakeem Jeffries that tries and holds a Democrat coalition together. Because as we have seen, many of these far left DSA style candidates, they have major gripes with the Democrat Party. And so this could create not only a near-term problem for the Democrat Party as they try and make the president of the United States a lame duck for the remainder of his 2 years in the Oval Office, but I think even more broadly creates a larger problem, for the Democrat Party as we get into 2028. So we've got this article over at the Washington Monthly that is laying out some of the details from this poll. And we talked about some of the broader, more what would be described as progressive ideas, more money for public education, more money for essentially taxpayer-funded healthcare and things like that. Amongst Democrats, liberals, and more moderate individuals, there's some pretty broad support, which makes sense and adds up. However, that coalition breaks down pretty clearly when asked about things like socialism and ideological branding. Back to the article and back to the details from the CBS News YouGov poll. Only 35% of those respondents overall have a positive view of socialism, including 9% with a very positive view. Powdered by 71% of liberals and 58% of Democrats. Support tanks among moderates, just 32% of the middle-of-the-road voter, which is a very important group of people, and independents at just 36%. Asked if socialist policies would, quote, make your personal economic and financial situation better, 61% of liberals and 52% of Democrats agree, but only 26% of moderates and 29% of independents agree with that statement. So they are way underwater with those questions and with those voting blocks. Moreover, while the label moderate is treated with scorn by many on the left, it outpolls progressives. Asked if, do you think U.S. policies would be better, worse, or the same with more moderates in office, 47% said better and only 14% said worse. A plurality of 43% of liberals agreed. The share among Democrats, 50%, independents, 49%, and even Republicans, 47%, was similar. Progressive branded politicians earned a weaker plurality, with 40% offering better, but 31% predicting worse. The article reads and goes on to say, we see a steep decline in the better camp from Democrats to independents, 66 to 38%, and from liberals to moderate, 73% to just 37%. So very interesting to see that drop off there. The article then opines, how can Democrats hold together a center-left coalition? On NBC's Meet the Press last Sunday, we saw House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries try and articulate areas of common ground while distancing himself from his party, or distancing himself and his party, the Democrat Party, from the DSA. Asked if there is room in the Democratic Party under the tent of the Democratic Party for Democratic Socialists, Jeffries didn't quite answer directly, but did throw an elbow. He said, and I quote, "I do not support the DSA agenda," and has been articulated by the DSA itself. Now, you're going to have individual members who will be elected in Democratic primaries, and if they are elected in the general election in November, they will be part of the House Democratic Caucus. It's going to be a broad caucus. There will be progressives. There will be new Dems, which I assume he means DSA members. There will be blue dogs. And so that is a really good indication of how the chips are falling on this issue. You've got arguably one of the most important men in the Democratic Party, and I'm no big fan of Hakeem Jeffries, but after all, he is the House Minority Leader. Outside of Chuck Schumer, it is an accurate statement to say he is the most popular, the most influential and important elected Democrat in the United States. He's very much in the top of that list due to his current position in the United States House, and he bluntly says, "I don't support the DSA agenda." That is a very clear indication of what is to come with these members. That you have to remember, the DSA folk, as I mentioned in the open, they are a rabid group of individuals. They are super politically engaged. They are super politically involved. They are incredibly far on the left side of the political spectrum, and they don't like getting along with people. They don't build coalitions. They don't work with individuals that they don't agree with 100% of the time. And that, to me, is going to be the major problem, not only for somebody like Hakeem Jeffries, but the Democrat Party moving forward. One of the things that is important in politics is being able to understand and wrap your head around the reality of you're not always going to get 100% of what you want. You have to make concessions. When you've got literally hundreds of individuals that have to agree on something, no one individual person is going to get 100% of what they want. And anybody that feels like they're always going to get in a large governing body like this 100% of what they want, they're foolish. They're morons. They're idiots. That's not how this process works. We even see this on smaller levels. Look at the size of the North Carolina General Assembly in comparison. Not everybody gets what they want. Boil it down even smaller. Look at what goes on city council and county commission meetings across the state of North Carolina. Some of these boards are 5 to 7 members. That is a relatively small group of people. Not every single person, even on the winning side of an issue, gets what they want 100% of the time. And so you have to determine what you're willing to, quote unquote, give up on and what you're willing to concede to get 80 or 90 or 70% of what you want. The DSA folk, the far left progressive wing of the Democrat Party, is not capable of doing that. They have proven publicly time and time again that that is not something that they are willing to do. And so that creates a major problem here for the Democratic Party. It creates a major problem to potentially determine, and I know this is far away, but who ends up becoming the House Speaker? If Democrats flip control of the U.S. House, which seems pretty plausible here in this midterm election, does Hakeem Jeffries even have a coalition to get elected Speaker? Does he have the votes with the DSA? With these far-left progressives who he just said on national television this week he does not support their agenda? I don't know. So you could see an immediate fight right off the bat with these individuals clashing heads with the Democratic Party. It's going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. We are rounding out our discussion as it relates to the rise of the DSA, the more socialist wing of the Democratic Party, as they have risen to some level of prominence in Democratic primaries. The reason this is on the plate here today is that Representative Angie Nixon, a Democrat in the Florida legislature representing portions of Jacksonville, who is a proud member of the Democratic Socialists of America, won her Democratic primary last night for U.S. Senate in the state of Florida. Don't be alarmed. Florida is a very red state. She will be facing off against Senator Ashley Moody, who will win that election. Florida is not a swing state. It is not a purple state. It is a solid red state. However, it is important to note that the DSA member and Representative Nixon beat a more moderate, if you want to call it that, Democratic candidate that raised $16.3 million compared to just $1 million raised by the winning candidate in Representative Nixon. So you're talking about a major spending difference, a major spending advantage, could be as high as 12 to 16 to 1 in terms of spending and fundraising, who won that election. And so the question remains, and the question has been, can these DSA folk, can they get along with the Democratic Party? Because at the end of the day, yes, they are members of the DSA. Yes, they are far left progressives. They're not running as independents. They're not running as a third-party candidate. They are registered Democrats and running in Democratic primaries. So as these individuals look to try and win their general elections in November, of which we will definitely see many of the DSA candidates that we've talked about over the last couple of months winning their primaries are in very safe blue areas. Can somebody like a Hakeem Jeffries try and build some level of coalition with these people so that the Democrats can actually govern? We've been going through an article over at Washington Monthly highlighting some details from a poll conducted by CBS News and YouGov, and there's some interesting things in that. There's also another interesting article I caught over at the Washington Examiner, written by a member of the member of the United States House, Mary Miller, who is a representative from Illinois, a Republican there, wrote this op-ed. In common sense versus crazy, Democrats lose every time. And the long and short of the article, she writes, we are less than 3 months from the midterm elections, and for all the billions of dollars that will be spent convincing Americans otherwise, the choice facing voters is remarkably straightforward. Do Americans want to be guided by common sense or by crazy woke ideas that have endlessly proven to make our lives worse? If you prefer the former, they can let Republicans continue driving American prosperity. If they prefer the latter, they can give Democrats the wheels. The individual issues may change: crime, immigration, abortion, elections, education, so on and so forth, but the through line remains remarkably consistent. Vile ideas that would have once been confined to the lunatic fringe just a decade ago have found eager champions in today's Democratic Party. And that hits the nail right on the head. I'll have the link to this full article. I'd encourage you to read it over in the show notes. So that brings me to where things are here in North Carolina. The Carolina Journal recently released a poll back just last week. They released these polls throughout the year, and there was a question about socialism in this poll. Here was the question. It was 24, so it was pretty deep into the poll. Would you be more or less likely to support a candidate who identifies as a democratic socialist? Important to note that this poll was responded to by 600 voters here in North Carolina. So this is the North Carolina tie-in on all of this. Again, would you be more or less likely to support a candidate who identifies as a democratic socialist? Much more likely got a response of 15.1%. Somewhat more likely got a response of 10.4%. You add those two numbers together, and you've got, let's just for all intents and purposes, call it 25.5% of individuals that are either somewhat or much more likely to support somebody that identifies as a democratic socialist. We then flip to the other side of that question. 43% say that they are much less likely, compared to 5% who say that they are somewhat less likely to support a Democratic Socialist candidate. So you've got a number there that is approaching nearly 49% of individuals that say they are much or somewhat less likely to vote for somebody that is self-described as a Democratic Socialist. That is the overwhelming plurality in this poll. 25.5% saying, yeah, we want to support these DSA candidates. Almost 50% that say no. There's another group in the middle, 16.9% say that they are neither more nor less likely to support somebody that identifies as a Democratic Socialist, and about 8.5% say that they are unsure moving forward. This is one of the things, and I mentioned this briefly in the last segment, this is one of the things that I'm going to continue to watch in the weeks and months to come. Why? As I noted, polls are snapshots. Polls are a one-time look at a relatively small number of people at a specific given point in time. In the case of the most recent Carolina Journal poll, it is 600 voters, likely general election voters in North Carolina, that were asked these questions August 9th through August 10th. Things have changed in a variety of different ways since August 9th and August 10th. And so you can't look at a poll that was conducted and say, oh, this is gospel. And it's why many of the popular websites, one of the ones that I've talked about a lot, is Real Clear Polling, a product of Real Clear Politics, which takes all of these polls, looks at the different ranges and the margins of errors and so on and so forth, and it comes up with an aggregate number based on all of these details. Every pollster is different. Every metric is different. The way that they conduct their polls are a little bit different. There's a lot of dynamics that are different in every single one of these polls. And so the things that you look for as somebody that I really enjoy looking at political pollings and diving into crosstabs is, what is the trend line? And I feel confident in saying to you today that the trend line between national polls and some of the statewide polls that I've seen on this, particularly here in North Carolina, is that the idea of candidates being up front as members of the DSA, wearing that badge proudly on their shirt, is not a winning strategy. It might work in the primary. It might work in very blue, very progressive, very left-wing areas. But the polling is now painting a picture that individuals that are running around during a general election and telling people and highlighting that they are proud members of the Democratic Socialists of America, proud members of the DSA, is a losing strategy. Because between the CBS YouGov poll that we talked about earlier in the show, and then this just one question from this Carolina Journal poll that was out last week conducted by Harper Polling, voters very quickly distance themselves when are bluntly asked, do you support socialism? When you put the word socialism in one of these questions, when you put the word socialism in one of these polls, voters are running for the hills. It's like, how cockroaches and things, bugs scatter when you turn the lights on. That's exactly what the response has been in this case. When the word socialist is introduced, when the word DSA is introduced, people run for the hills. And it's no surprise, because at the core of this, the American people do not support socialism. They do not support communism. They might support some progressive ideals. They might support some progressive policies, but they are satisfied in large part with the American system. Is it perfect? No. Does it have flaws? Yes. But they understand that socialism is not the path forward for the United States of America. They understand that abundantly clear. I'll have the links to all of these polls and all of these articles. You can get access to that over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, where you can support the program and get access to our daily show notes. It's going to be very interesting to watch. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I've got some crystal ball that gives me all the answers to these questions. There is a lot that can change. There's a lot that will change. Things continue to be pretty dynamic with all of this. Nevertheless, I'll be keeping an eye on all of this. And as things continue to play out, we'll continue to bring it to you right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Wednesday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Wednesday. We'll do it again tomorrow right here on The Nick Craig Show.